Well, it's a tough thing to think about, but someday when you're gone, you want to make sure your loved ones are taken care of, and you need to think about more than just the assets you will plan on passing on to them. You also need to consider the tax implications of that inheritance. To help us understand our options, we've got Jonathan McCoy here with us from Market Advisory Group. So first off, Jonathan, how can inheritances hurt people when it comes to the tax perspective?
Well, in a wide variety of ways. So if we think about assets such as real estate or after-tax style of investments, there's actually a tax benefit called the step up in cost basis at the time of your passing. So that can help alleviate some of the tax burden of an inheritance. But the vast majority of the time, people are retiring with all of their assets, or the majority of their assets, being in 401ks or IRAs or something they have not paid taxes on. So if you don't spend through all that money by the time you pass away, your beneficiaries are going to have to start paying taxes on that money as well. And the way that Congress is starting to constrain the tax laws on some of those inherited IRA assets, it's starting to increase the taxable income for a lot of folks. It's just making it more and more expensive to inherit these things.
And I'm sure that's something that a lot of people don't even really think about when they're talking about
It's
an inheritance.
decades down the road, right? When none of us know when our last day might be. But fortunately, at Market Advisory Group, where we find ourselves benefiting from just in the planning process, is looking through this with not just our estate planning attorney to make sure that things are titled correctly, that you've got the right beneficiaries in place, but also our tax team working with the estate planning attorney to say, here's how this is going to impact your beneficiaries, if at all, and we work with our teams to minimize those impacts as much as possible.
And so I'm sure there's a lot of people at home thinking, do all financial advisors automatically help prepare their clients and their children for what an inheritance looks like and how that tax will impact them?
From my experience, the unfortunate answer is no. Most financial advisors are not licensed to give advice in these areas, whether it's estate planning or tax management. And you have to ask yourself the question, what are you paying for as far as holistic advice when you're working with a financial advisor, and ultimately the only advice you might be getting is, here's where to invest your money. Not thinking 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road about the tax implications that we just talked about, and also how are your beneficiaries expected to handle these assets if you're no longer around. Getting the entire family prepared for that process is something that we focus on.
And so we do have a viewer question for you. This one is from Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks, in Missouri, can you change the name of the owner of an IRA? My family recently inherited money from my dad's IRA, and there's some dispute over who gets what from his assets.
So in Elizabeth's circumstance, my first recommendation is, this is the perfect example of someone who should probably come in and talk to us in our office. One-on-one free complimentary consultations are the major way that we're meeting people these days. But in Elizabeth's circumstance, unfortunately, if beneficiaries were not listed correctly, then the IRA assets can end up going through probate, which can be an expensive and drawn out and frustrating process. So it starts really long before you might pass away, and making sure that there's an appropriate plan in place. On an IRA specifically, no matter what state you live in, you cannot just change the name of the owner. In order to shift ownership of IRA assets, those taxes have to be paid. So whether it's moving into a trust or moving to an individual, eventually the taxes have to be paid on that money.
Makes sense. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, to schedule a complimentary consultation and submit your questions, visit AskOurAdvisor.com or call 816-548-2000. They'll take your questions and even meet with you one-on-one free of charge. If you include your address, Market Advisory Group will even send you a free gift.